has done a lot of things to piss off a lot of people over the years, whether it be from the very first time that I heard about him, on YouTube at least, which was the severityness of how bad his colorblind was in the video that H3H3 and iDubbbz made, or that time that he went to Japan. It was completely disrespectful of the people and their culture, and his overall behavior being there was just entirely rude and aggravating and annoying. Or even in the same time frame when he went into that forest and did something even worse than just being disrespectful of Japanese culture. Or even something as recent as him scamming a whole bunch of people out of thousands and thousands of dollars in CryptoZoo, in which he still hasn't reimbursed them at all for what they had been scanned for, even though he said that he was going to. Regardless, what we're here to talk about is him and George Janko. George Janko was a previous host on the Impulsive podcast. He has since left and quit and started his own podcast, and he recently had an episode where he was talking with Mike Malak, who's also another host of Impulsive. And basically in the podcast, he airs out a whole bunch of stuff, talking about the time frame in which Logan was being very disrespectful towards George and his faith, and the fact that they weren't making a whole bunch of money because of that, and he was struggling to make a whole bunch of money to pay for his expenses, like trying to have a wedding with his wife, or trying to pay the expenses for his sister because he had hired his sister to work for him, or paying off his mortgage and stuff like that. He was struggling a lot to make a lot of money, and he was spending more money to be on Impulsive than he was making money when he was on there. He was spending like $10,000. He would only gain back like $5,000. He was very much struggling a lot to make any money. He would also talk about the Bobby Lee situation, in which Bobby Lee was doing a lot of very inappropriate things towards George. And in the episode and the way that it was edited, it made George look terrible, and like he couldn't actually take a joke because Bobby Lee is a comedian. He was trying to make a joke towards George Janko and left, and it was making it really seem like he wasn't actually able to take a joke from Bobby Lee, but that's not actually what ended up happening. And a whole bunch of other stuff that we'll get to later on in the video. But Logan Paul has since made a response video talking about it, and the response has been diversive, but if you just pay attention and you watch not only the podcast episode with George and Mike, but also Logan's like own response to what was being said from George, you could see pretty clearly that Logan Paul was leaving out a lot of context and editing the video in a certain way that would benefit him and make him look like the good person, when in reality all he's really doing is just making George look like an idiot and making him look like he's talking mad shit. So let's actually get into it right now.
I had to start my own show because we're not making money on the show, and I'm getting pushed out.
You made money on the show.
I can show you my books. I was spending 10 G's a month being on the show.
All right, let's talk about this. Obviously, I wasn't on the podcast to represent myself, so I'd like to clarify a few things that were said. As well as having his own credit card, all expenses related to the show were paid for, including all travel and lodging. Obviously, George's total reimbursement came out to $20,000, 317 cents. I'd love to see any books that show otherwise. Spending $120,000 a year to be on a show is a little confusing.
So Logan starts off with his video talking about the first claim and the fact that George wasn't actually making money. And I do believe him when he says that George actually had his own card that belonged to the company, and it would use company expenses, and that would eventually be paid off through the company. He lays out pretty crucial details that were actually very important, and it's the fact that George was struggling to make money, be able to pay for his other expenses.
When Logan came after me for my religion, the show hit rock bottom, and we weren't getting paid. I was getting paid $5,000 a month, and that's covering just Reed. I have a mortgage, I have my sister that works for me, I have Belle, I'm trying to get married, I had all these things. So I had to start my own show because we're not making money on the show, and I'm getting pushed out of this show.
Well, at the time, we weren't making money. You made money on the show.
But at the time, we're a couple months.
How much money did you make over the course
I can show you my books. I was spending 10 G's a month being on the show.
That was the main point. The fact that he was a part of the podcast during a time where they weren't making a whole bunch of money, and he was struggling to make a lot of money to pay for his other expenses, like paying for his sister who worked for him, paying his mortgage, paying for a wedding with his wife, etc., etc. He leaves out that detail, which seems like a very strange thing to do, to leave out for some reason, because it was much more than just not making enough money through being on the podcast.
This is a guy who's sending us screenshots of $11 million a week that he's making.
This statement is so crazy that it's almost laughable. That would mean I'm making $572 million a year. I'm nowhere near that. What happened was Prime had a very successful month. I think we did like 60 to 70 million, and I sent it to our group chat because I was proud of the business. I was stoked to show the boys, and I think George maybe misinterpreted that as like my personal income.
The next point that he brings up is revolving around the fact that George mentions how during 1 week, Logan Paul shared a screenshot in which he made $11 million in a week, which is very surprising considering the fact that if he was making $11 million in just 1 week, at least at one point during the entirety of his tenure of being an owner of Prime, you'd think that he would be able to use that to pay off the expenses of people who got scammed during CryptoZoo, which is ironic if you really think about it for 2 seconds. But he tries to debunk this and saying that it was only during that 1 month period and it was only through Prime, which is kind of weird because he basically just confirms that he did make $11 million at least in 1 week during 1 month during his tenure of owning Prime, which he still owns, and he owns a percentage portion of Prime. So he's trying to say that that's not his personal income, but he owns Prime, so that is your personal income. So I'm not really sure why he's trying to say that this is wrong, because what George said wasn't wrong. He was still correct.
The show hit rock bottom and we weren't getting paid. I was getting paid $5,000 a month.
But you did make a sizable amount of money on the show.
And by the
What
way,
would you say,
always
like,
grateful. I was always grateful.
like
for
that?
it. Yeah, I don't like to talk about money.
I know he doesn't want to talk money. I know he believes it out, but George made $317,000 in the 15 months that he got paid for on Impulsive. The work requirements consisted of about 3 days a month, 3 hours each day, traveling the world, networking, and meeting some of the coolest people ever. It comes out to about $2,300 per hour, and he also had 10% equity of the entire show.
The next point that Logan touches on is so strange to me because he's basically saying like, wow, like George was working like this huge dream job that so many people would like die to work for. And George wasn't saying that the job that he had wasn't good, right? And he's not even saying that he made zero money at all. He's saying that at one portion, whilst he was working on Impulsive for you, Logan, that he wasn't making that much money, that he was only being paid $5,000 a month, and that he was struggling to pay off anything of his expenses. Not that he wasn't being paid at all, because he did make a substantial amount of money. Mike says that, and George does agree to that.
And by the way, let's not forget that for a year and a half, I didn't get paid.
No, and I didn't get paid for years.
Okay.
Until I got paid.
Okay, so
right?
let's just make sure
But you did make a sizable amount of money on the show.
And by the
What would
way,
you say,
always
like,
grateful. I was always grateful.
like
for
that?
it. Yeah, I don't like to talk about money, but I was
Sorry.
always grateful. Always grateful. I think anybody could see that.
But I think the whole thing that really bugged me about this portion of the video was that during the podcast episode, Mike actually says how much he made, which is around $317,000, which is a lot of money, and that's something that George even says to himself that he was very thankful for. But I think the thing that really bugs me the most is that Mike says it, they bleep it, and Mike then apologizes for saying that because he realizes George might not want to talk about his money, which he even says himself. It really bugs me that Logan hears this, says it, acknowledges the fact that George doesn't want to talk about how much money he makes and how overall his just finances in general, and then just completely talks about it anyways, about how much money that he made during his time on Impulsive. It was very strange. I'm not really sure why he included this. That gives off a really bad image for Logan in this video.
Not you, not Caleb, not Kevin, not Dylan. Nobody fucking called me when I got fired.
George did not get fired. He quit. I'll touch on that in a second, but after he quit, I called him.
Not you, not Caleb, not Kevin, not Dylan. Nobody fucking called me when I got fired. Not one person called me. You know what I get a call from? Logan saying, at least Mike wouldn't do this. And then on my birthday, you guys shot 3 episodes so I couldn't show up.
The 2 episodes he's talking about, not 3, were shot 4 days after George's birthday. His birthday's on January 3rd. We shot those episodes on January 7th. We were already in Vegas signing the UFC to Prime, and as we do, want to capitalize on the location and our use of time and energy and the guests in that city. George didn't come to work because he wanted to spend time with his family for his belated birthday, which I totally understand and we even praised.
So fair enough for Logan on this next point. It's honestly kind of minuscule in comparison to some of the other stuff that George had to mention during the podcast episode with Mike, but fair enough. Logan and Mike didn't have to stop working on new Impulsive episodes whilst George was celebrating his birthday with his family, and like that doesn't need to happen. He didn't need to specifically wait until George came back to be on the podcast to start making more episodes, because even Logan acknowledges that he understood that he wanted to spend time with his family. You know, that's not something specific that he needed to wait for. Whatever, kind of like a minute point because it doesn't necessarily matter on that much. Again, considering the fact that we're about to touch on later in the video.
I got my show going, and then not only was I controlled and pushed around on Impulsive, but then Logan's making calls and directing my show. He told me that I couldn't take Celsius.
So this is the big one. Making calls, trying to make it seem like I wanted to control his show is absolutely ridiculous. As you can see right here, I was like, hey, we got to get you Prime because I saw him drinking our competitor, and he told me to call him. He was filming my reaction to tell me he took a deal with a competitor. I told him, please don't film. Like, I'd like to talk about this. I hope you're joking, by the way. The truth is, I thought it was a bad look that my best friend and co-host took a brand deal with our competitor without consulting me, asking me, giving us even a chance to match it before he signed the deal.
Okay, so this next point is very strange, interesting to say the least, because it's due to the fact that Logan says that it's like the biggest thing that George had to bring up, even though it's definitely not. And it's the fact that George makes claims that Logan was trying to take control over parts of his podcast, everything about it. And it also has to do with the fact that George ended up taking a sponsorship deal with Celsius, which, if you don't know, it's basically just a competitor for Prime, which Logan Paul owned. And he basically tries to say that George took the deal with Celsius without consulting with Logan first, without consulting with Prime first to see if they could actually match their deal or give him a better deal, and he went ahead and went with his competitor. And he also says that if he went with Celsius, that he wouldn't be able to go on Impulsive because he's promoting a direct competitor for Prime, which George already said that that's what happened. He already said that if he had took the deal with Celsius, he wouldn't be able to go on Impulsive and wouldn't be able to be a host anymore. But something that Logan actually leaves out is that as George and Logan were trying to strike up a deal, put a deal on the table for George to go for Prime instead of Celsius, Logan actually says something entirely fucked up, and I can't believe he actually decided to say this, if this is true, which knowing Logan, I honestly kind of believe that he would say something like this.
When I get that call and I tell him, I go, Logan, I get it, bro. And I fully told him, I go, listen, man, like, I will take half the deal that Celsius gives me. Half. If you want to put it on the table for my show, a quarter, work with me. He says, I won't pay you a dime. You're here because of me. And then I said, well, what do you want me to do for my bills, bro? I got no money. And he says, go have your rich dad pay for it.
Listen,
that's fighting words, bro. Look at me.
No,
that's fighting words, bro. You don't bring up somebody's father.
Would you say
bro.
that the way that you handled it from a word standpoint was mature, acceptable?
What did I say? That I beat the fucking brakes off of him?
Correct.
If he was in front of me, I would have swung at him.
I genuinely cannot believe that he actually said this. This is entirely fucked up. Like, even George says to himself, those are fighting words, and I kind of agree with him on that, because you can't just bring up someone's family when someone's trying to struggle and make their own expenses. That's fucked up. Logan should not have said that. I can't believe he actually decided to say that to someone who was supposed to be his friend of all people. I can't believe it.
Hey man, where you're at, there's no room for you to grow. They won't let you grow. They will not let you grow.
I thought saying that to Mike was a little crazy. He's grown a lot. He has 2.7 million subscribers since we met. He's a multimillionaire, a best-selling author. I tried as much as I could to help him get into those positions, and it's not entirely because of me. Mike is a phenom in his own right, and he capitalized on the platform that I gave him, which is awesome. Just like George is doing now, but if that's not growth, like what is?
This next point is very strange because he takes George completely out of context. George was saying that he will not let you grow, and he's saying that towards Mike. But if you watch the podcast episode, you know that he was talking about very personal stuff. Like, on a personal, deep, emotional level, he's saying to Mike that if you stick to where you are and where you currently are in your life, you're not going to grow.
This is showbiz, bro.
Yeah.
It's a fucked up,
yeah, you're right. I'm too emotional.
Place.
I'm very emotional.
No,
I will
and
admit
by
that.
the way, God bless you for it. God bless you for that emotionality. And having that emotional intelligence that was called into question. God bless you for it, bro. You have to shed some of that, certainly, to be in that space. Yes, shit gets said to me. Yeah, I feel left out of shit. Certainly I fucking do, and it pisses me off, and it makes me frustrated and saddened. Of course it does.
I just think the position you're in, and I have to say this confidently, and I hope I'm not just being a kid that's ranting. I'm literally just trying to meet the man that I used to be, which I think is you, and tell you, hey man, where you're at, there's no room for you to grow. They won't let you grow. They will not let you grow.
That had a lot to do with the fact that Mike was talking about how he was in a very fucked up position, even when working with Logan, which from the sounds of things seems really fucked up. If not even just George, but even Mike himself was in a very shitty position when working with Logan or being a host of Impulsive, which is very strange, and it's crazy that it's only now being revealed to a whole bunch of people now. But Logan was basically just talking about how, oh, look at how many subscribers that he has, look at how much money that he makes. You know, he's a multi-millionaire and is a best-selling author and all that stuff, when that's not what George was talking about. He just takes a clip of him and takes it completely out of context and doesn't explain what George was actually talking about. He just uses it as an example to try to make George look bad, which is fucking terrible.
There's a lot more. I'm not going to get into it, but this isn't to say, by the way, that I didn't fuck up along the way. I did. I should not have mocked his beliefs. I apologize for that. I should have stuck up for him with Bobby Lee, and I definitely should have had his back more like a friend. There's a lot of things I would have done differently, but here we are. It saddens me that our story has unfolded this way. I wish him nothing but health, wealth, happiness, all the success that he wants, and I hope that one day we can sit down and have a relationship and a conversation.
To cap off the rest of Logan's response, it basically just ends with him completely dismissing the last thing that George Janko really had to say about his time on Impulsive. And it had to do with him being on an episode with Bobby Lee as a guest. And basically during this, he was being very physical with him and borderline doing sexual harassment towards George in the sake of comedy, because Bobby Lee is a comedian and George isn't even mad or doesn't even hate Bobby Lee or anything. He acknowledges what he was trying to do. He understands his style of comedy, but it was the fact that Bobby Lee was doing this the entire time, and then they edited out a whole bunch of context from that podcast episode, and it made George look fucking terrible and look like an idiot and look like he couldn't actually handle a joke, even though that's not what ended up happening. Later, George even says that Logan says that he doesn't give a fuck what George looks like in the context of the podcast episode, because the way that they edit episodes that involve a guest, they edit it in a way that makes the guest look good. And Mike even says this himself.
Yeah.
Okay, the Bobby Lee situation.
Who was the first person that jumped off the couch and said, George just left, that was not good, we have to fix this situation?
But did they not cut shit that you should have stood up for me and said, hey, you can't cut that shit?
We have numerous times on the show, which I'm sure a number of shows do, cut things that we believe will protect the integrity or reputation of the guest.
Yeah. I've tried to make peace to them behind closed doors. I try to reach out. I try to be cool. But by the way, and I'll just say this, we'll just empty it out. I never had a problem with Bobby Lee.
No, he knows
I
that.
had a problem with the way that Logan and you were kind of gassing him to keep doing. He started the episode putting his balls in my face. I let that one go. Then every 2 seconds, he kept grabbing my dick.
I don't think...
How would you feel if a man that has his back completely towards you, that only turns around to grab your dick,
right,
talk shit to your face, and you can't smack or beat the living brakes off of this guy? Because Logan makes me apologize to this man, or I don't have a job on Impulsive anymore.
What did you want me to do about the Bobby Lee?
I don't know, maybe not tell me to shut up after I get sexually harassed.
I didn't tell you to shut up. I never said that.
I looked at Logan, I go, Logan, this is gonna make me look really bad.
No.
And he says, I don't give a fuck what you look like. Bro, come on, dog. You were standing right next to me when he said that.
The fact that you're putting George in a situation where he either has to apologize to someone who was being very disrespectful towards him the entire time when he was in the podcast episode, or else he's gonna lose his job and he can no longer pay for his finances and can no longer pay his bills and etc. etc. I can't believe that Logan would do something like this, because he's just a fucking narcissistic piece of shit who only really cares about himself and his own personal growth and wealth, which he's been doing this for a very long time. Like I said at the beginning of the video, Logan Paul, what hasn't he done? He's done so many things to piss off so many people, and I genuinely I'm not surprised. You know, like I wish that he wasn't like this, because there was a period of time, at least for a short while, where he didn't seem like to be that fucking terrible, but it kept creeping back in. You know, he just kept doing more shitty shit, you know, just promoting crypto scams and then scamming people with their crypto zoo, and just overall just being a complete narcissist, you know, a narcissistic, sociopathic motherfucker who just doesn't deserve the platform that he has and doesn't deserve the support that he gets. Especially during like this response to George, because it was fucking terrible. Yeah, that's really all I have to say about the situation. I think what Logan is doing here and what he did to George was really fucked up. I wish that it didn't happen, but I think ultimately in the end, the silver lining is that George ended up finding his own path in his career, and he's a much better person off without being a part of Logan in his camp anymore. Because from what we're hearing, and from if you watch the podcast with George Janko and Mike Malak, it sort of just sounds like that they have a very terrible, toxic work environment over on Logan's team, and I can't understand why anybody would want to work with Logan besides just making a whole lot of money, which is probably the reason why they are working with him, because he makes a lot of money and they get paid very well. Which we know that they get paid very well, because George was fucking paid $317,000 just to be a third guy on a podcast, and that's it. So yeah, that's all I really have to say about the situation. I think Logan is a piece of shit. I think he needs to own up to his mistakes and actually apologize for the stuff that he didn't do. And I think George is a good guy. I think, like I said, he's in a much better place, and he's much better off not being around Logan anymore, because he just seems like a genuine, good dude, and I wish for the best for him. And I feel bad that he had to go through all the terrible things that he had to go through when working with Logan. But that's pretty much it for me. If you liked the video, be sure to leave a like, and if you want to see more, please be sure to subscribe. We're almost at 6,000 subscribers, so I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to help me reach that goal. Be sure to turn on bell notifications so you don't miss future videos. Go check out my last video because it was on FaZe Clan, and if you want to know my thoughts and opinions about the stuff that happened around them a couple of weeks ago, go ahead and check it out. It's right there. Anyways, that's pretty much it. Like the video, subscribe. I'll see you guys next one. I'm out. Peace.